Associated Press photographer James Alkin was actually looking toward the book depository.
As I was getting ready to make some pictures, I heard this noise. I thought it was a firecracker explosion. I just went ahead and made the picture, which shows the president right after he was struck by a bullet, struck in the neck, the first shot. And this was a picture that the Warren report later fixed as being made 2 seconds after the shot was fired. And as they got in close to me, and I was prepared to make the picture, I had my camera almost at eye level. That's when the president was shot in the head. And I do know that the president was still in an upright position, tilted, favoring Mrs. Kennedy. And at the time that he was struck by this blow to the head, it was so obvious that it came from behind. It had to come from behind, because it caused him to bolt forward, dislodging him from this depression in the seat cushion. And already favoring Mrs. Kennedy, he automatically fell in that direction. The one thing that did seem to be a little bit strange, immediately after the car proceeded on to Parkland Hospital, men with drawn guns ran up the terrace of this plaza up into what is considered to be and referred to as the knoll area, and thinking that they had the assassin cornered up in this knoll area. And it seemed rather strange, as I say, because knowing that the shot came from behind, this fellow had to really move in order to get over into the knoll area.
You have no thoughts about another assassin behind the fence or on the knoll?
I've had a lot of people to contact me, and that they felt there was another person involved in trying to get me to verify either photographs they had or to work out some information they felt they had come across to substantiate the evidence substantiate the fact that there was another assassin. But at no time has any of this evidence proved to me beyond a shadow of a doubt that there was another assassin.
I welcome this kind of examination.
You are free to do as we tell you. You are free to do as we tell you.
His head could be seen to move violently forward.
Back and to the left. Back and to the left.
That's why I don't read the newspaper. I'm a man. I'm 40.
What did the president know, and when did he know it?
I began by telling the president that there was a cancer growing on the presidency.
As of now, I am in control here in the White House.
This is crack cocaine from the White House. It could easily have been heroin or PCP. It's as innocent looking as candy.
Good evening. This is Mae Bressel in Carmel, California.
Anybody who's not willing to change based on what they learned is ignorant.
Coffee's for closers only.
I think we're giving you enough.
Go on to Chicago and let's win there.
Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive.
This is the Midnight Writer News Show with S.T. Patrick.
Hi, this is author Douglas Horn. You're listening to the Midnight Writer News Show with S.T. Patrick.
Hello, America and the world. Welcome to the Midnight Writer News Show. I'm S.T. Patrick, your friendly neighborhood host, traipsing and traversing through the trials and travails that have so tempestuously and untruthfully been blasted into your eyes, ears, and minds by the state-sponsored talking heads, the court historians, and those textbook conglomerates that still control information today. Now, tonight we have episode 112, Larry Rivera on the JFK assassination's most controversial photos. Our guest tonight is researcher and author Larry Rivera. He'll join us next in the midnight hour. But first, let's clean this castle. Now, we're still on Patreon at patreon.com/midnightwriternews. So if you'd like to help us out a little bit financially, that's where you can do it, along with PayPal as always. And happy to announce that the first issue of Garrison, our new magazine, will release live at the Olney Conference in April. So if you're in Olney, you can buy it there. Online, it'll release the day that we return from Olney. Now, as you know, there were quite a few glitches that prevented us from selling Deep Truth Journal on Amazon. And I still honestly don't quite understand what happened there. Some kind of an error popped up when we tried to load it up, when we tried to offer it. But we sent emails to Amazon, we sent requests to Amazon, and frankly, we heard nothing back. So Amazon isn't very responsive. And it's not really user-friendly at all. So there's no one there to contact by phone. There's no live chat where you can ask for help. There's no anything whatsoever. You just have to do a form, and if they respond, fine. And if they don't, there's no other recourse that you have. So when they don't respond, you're just out of luck. So that said, I've already started trying to figure out more about Amazon and how to post there. And we're going to try to post Garrison there, a Deep Truth Journal. The first issue will still be available at Alibris, so you should all buy it there. And if not, we'll also go to Alibris with Garrison, and we'll certainly try to list it on Barnes & Noble if at all possible. So stay tuned, and we'll update you as soon as we know anything about that. And until then, we'll be right back with Larry Rivera.
This is Peter Janney, author of Mary's Mosaic, the CIA conspiracy to murder John F. Kennedy, Mary Pinchot Meyer, and their vision for world peace. For more on the murders of a president, and a well-connected Washington, D.C. socialite, and an ideal shared by both, listen to episode 81 of the Midnight Rider News Show.
Larry Rivera was the first speaker at my first JFK conference. Great job there. And he was also one of the first researchers who agreed to appear on this show. And it's completely my fault that it took this long to make that happen. Larry has been out of the country some. He may not mind me telling you this, but he's a really good guy, and he spent quite a bit of time trying to help Puerto Rico, which is still reeling from the effects of Hurricane Maria in the fall of 2017. But when he's home from that, he spends quite a bit of time going over the photographic evidence of the Kennedy assassination. That and the document releases are what I would say are really his forte, and they'll be the two topics which we'll cover tonight. Now, he's the author of The JFK Horseman, a great book, and an all-around decent man. I'm really happy to have him here tonight, so let's get started. Larry, how are you this evening?
Oh, very good, ST. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you. Now, you've been doing some interesting work for a few years now, and I say interesting because I think that what we have to remember is this. We're talking about photography before the digital age. Not everyone took over 1,000 pictures a year, and pictures weren't pixel perfect. So this photographic evidence from 1963, it's often blurry, it's often shot from imperfect angles, and it's often shot without perfect lighting. The lighting is usually very poor, to be honest, and it's quite a challenge to go through it all as you have. But first, let's talk about your history with photography and the origin of your own interest in the JFK assassination. But what I'd really like to know is really how those two separate interests merge.
Certainly. My background in the JFK assassination goes back when I was 6 years old. My father was CID in the Army, and on the evening of November the 22nd, 1963, we heard about the assassination around 7 or 8 o'clock at night. That night, my dad had the graveyard shift, as they say, and he was resting up in the room, and I was with him. And my mom came in, and said, told him what happened, and immediately his reaction was pretty obvious to me that somebody very important had died. And from then on, I was always interested in a lot of the articles and magazines that came out over the years. I followed the HSCA in the 70s when I was in college. And then later on, I went back to school to go into computer networking and everything that had to do with computers. And then I got into graphics, specifically with Photoshop and another program called GIMP, which is open source. And that's when things started to merge for me as I examined the photographic evidence and realized that there was a problem with it. And in my book, one of the first in the preface, I mentioned that technology is finally catching up to the photographic evidence. And there's nothing more evident than with what we're going to discuss today. And it just seems to happen. It just seems to be that all the photographic evidence that was left behind has been tainted. And there was an author, a researcher, whom I cover extensively in my book. Her name was Beverly Brunson. And she outright said, everything is tainted. There's not a single piece of evidence in the photographic record that has not been altered. And she was she was talking about this back in the late 60s, where she corresponded with Harold Weisberg, and she collaborated with him for a couple of years. And it's very interesting how she stopped abruptly her research. And I go into this in my book because it's a very, very scary and interesting story all at the same time, where she gets kidnapped and drugged, and she gets lured into a meeting to discuss some of her JFK work. And it just so happens that I don't know of any other researcher or any of the first-generation researchers that ever had this type of thing happen to them. So anyway, that's we're going to discuss the photographic evidence and what I have been able to come up with based on the skills that I acquired over the years using these digital programs, and it's startling. So the results and everything, and how I presented them. I know that you were there in 2016, which at Judy's conference, which was the first time that I presented this, in a public setting. Prior to that, we had done a couple of shows, with Jim Fetzer and Gary King and myself. But to do it in Judy's type of setting is more like the big leagues, all right? And the response and the acceptance, of the work has just been overwhelming. I have challenged, and I have many times said that if anybody can replicate the work and come up with different results, then I'm here. I'm waiting for that to happen, and I'm still waiting, Steve. So.
Well, before we move to Dealey Plaza, Larry, I want to ask you about the infamous backyard photo of Lee Oswald. Now, it ran as a cover of a few magazines in 1964, I think most famously Life magazine in February of 1964. And it's a picture that supposedly Marina Oswald took of Lee holding a rifle and also two communist newspapers in his right hand. He's got a holster on his right hip, and it was supposedly taken in the backyard of their Oak Cliff duplex in 1963. Now, obviously, there's been quite a bit of controversy about this picture, maybe longer than any other picture associated with the assassination. Mm-hmm. And Oliver Stone focused on it in one scene of JFK where he shows the right hand of someone assembling the photo with an X-Acto knife as Laurie Metcalf's character describes Oswald's background. I think they're in a diner of some kind. Or maybe not a diner, but a restaurant. And we also know now that a 2015 Dartmouth study found that the backyard photo was authentic. At least that's what they said in the study. And, of course, the media predictably called this the final word. The USA Today, somewhat laughably, titled the story, "The verdict is in on whether Lee Harvey Oswald photo was faked thanks to 3D tech." Yes, that magical 3D tech. And that said, and I still have to laugh at the USA Today headline, there's still quite a bit of work to be done on this infamous backyard photo, is there not?
Oh, absolutely. That's been the latest. That was my presentation in Dallas this past November, and I happen to have we both coincide in that it was altered, but the way that it's presented in the movie JFK is not the way that it actually happened. My work on this, which actually was going to be presented at the mock trial in November of 2017 in Houston, for which I was never able to present that. At the 11th hour, I was excluded for reasons that are, we're not going to talk about here tonight. But it just so happens that I started to study, the body and the physique of the man who's portrayed in the backyard photos. And it seemed to me that was not the body of Lee Oswald at all. Now, in order to get that perfect fit, when you look at the backyard photo, to do that with an X-Acto knife, it's kind of kind of hard to visualize, and the result, seems so seamless, and easy to fool people, at first glance. And so I started to study, the physique instead of, the entire picture. And then I started to look into Roscoe White, Jack White. First of all, there was a lot of work done prior to even Oliver Stone presenting this. And this goes back to John Barber, who did that wonderful video called the Garrison Tapes. And within that video, he had an expert by the name of Stephen Jaffe. And Stephen Jaffe, when he went and compared, he did overlays but transparencies, and it's explained in the video. As you can see it on YouTube, it's still up there. But he noticed that the faces were all the same, and that the bodies, when he compared them, overlaying them onto another, the bodies differed in size, but the faces were exactly the same. And then Jack White also did some really, really good work, as you know, the late Jack White. And he noticed, the square chin, and which was not Lee Oswald's chin. And he noticed a strange bump over the right wrist of the man who's posing as Backyard Man. Okay, now Lee did not have that bump. Okay, but Jack White found pictures of Roscoe that had that exact same bump on the exact same place, on his wrist, up right above his right wrist. And it's seen, you can see it clearly in the backyard photos. So I just, took it one step further from what these two gentlemen had, the work that they had already done. And when I looked into the Jack White angle, and I found some really, really good information on the Weisberg site, where there was a paper there, and that paper described Roscoe White's abilities in the photographic science, and in this, in his abilities that he had gained in his training, he had learned how to overlay the faces of people onto photographs in a seamless way, where you couldn't even notice that somebody had worked on the photograph. Okay, and that's what really clicked. Once I read that paper, because then I went and I looked at. There's a famous photo of Roscoe at the beach with three other fellas. Okay. And I'm looking at the physique of this man, and I'm saying, wow, this guy, this looks exactly like the physique of the backyard photo of the Backyard Man. So I started to work on the overlays. I did the extraction, and I started to work with it, and it was like hand in glove, ST. The physique, the photograph, the overlay of the beach photo onto the Backyard Man was so incredibly perfect. The neck, the shoulders, the traps, how the chest, the V under the armpits, the thickness of the torso and everything. I couldn't have gotten a better match, if I tried, it was seamless. So once I got that established, I went in and I did the same thing for Lee. Okay, well, let me see how Lee, and I matches onto the actual backyard photo. And it wasn't even close, because Lee's, the distance, the neck, it wasn't even close. The problem with the chin, Lee, the height between his neck was shorter, whereas if I were to place Lee's face onto Backyard Man's face, the shoulders would rise up higher, much higher, and they were narrower. Okay, don't forget that Lee was 131, 132, 135 tops when he was photographed in Dallas that weekend. And with Roscoe, when you overlay him onto the backyard photos, he's a much burlier individual, even the head. When you exclude the face and you place Roscoe's image onto Backyard Man, it's a perfect fit. Even the head, the roundness of the head is different. Okay, and of Lee, I'm talking about, versus Roscoe onto the Backyard Man image, and that's when things just started to fall right into place. And when I published this actually on my blog, and anybody can just even right click. I don't prevent people from right clicking, and copying, whatever work is up there. I don't think that's I put that in the public domain. All right, and it's something that is new, and I think if you look at it objectively, scientifically speaking, anybody will come to the same conclusion.
And for those who may not know, who is Roscoe White?
Roscoe White was with Lee Oswald in the Marines. Okay, and I'll just quote from the site here. Roscoe grew up in the Red River Valley and married Ricky's mother. Ricky was his son. I don't know if for some of the people who aren't aware of it, in the early 1990s, Ricky came out and he had these press conferences saying that he had found his father's diary and a lot of material in a box that he had stashed away. And later on, he naively gave it to the FBI. But anyway, he had these press conferences saying that his father was involved in the JFK assassination. Roscoe and Lee trained in the Marines together, and they knew each other for years. Okay, they worked together at Jaggers Chow Stovall. That's the second place of employment that Lee worked after he came back from Russia, after he had defected and come back with Marina in June. Okay, so their backgrounds, paralleled each other, in a sense that, they knew each other. They're working at Jaggers Chow Stovall, which is a place that, I'm highly suspicious of as to where the Alton Six might have been altered, and I go into detail in my book about this because there had to have been, a place with the facilities and the technology to do that, which was close by in relation to Dealey Plaza, and Jaggers Chow Stovall matched the bill, perfectly. And if anybody reads the Warren Commission, there is there's a lot of detail as to what Jaggers Chow Stovall was capable of doing. But anyway, that's where a lot of people also believe that Lee might have falsified those ID cards, the Heidel ID cards. Okay, and there was a Reverend Jack Shaw, who was the last man to see Roscoe alive. He died in a very suspicious accident in a shop working with, I believe, welding equipment, acetylene, and which exploded. And this Reverend Jack Shaw knew, about what Roscoe told him, and the Reverend Jack Shaw, and this is only reported in Harry Livingston's book, High Treason 2, where the Reverend said, hey, Jaggers Chow Stovall, that's where the base of operations of the assassination was. Okay, and this was confirmed by Roscoe White. So Roscoe was very, very much involved. Some people think he might have been one of the shooters in the grassy knoll, and this and that. I don't go into the identities of who was where and who did what. As far as the assassination is concerned, I don't think it's really relevant. Okay, I do study the trajectories based on what we'll talk about in a little while, what the Blender model, the 3D model of Dealey Plaza tells us. Okay, so Roscoe, again, a very, very important part of this whole saga. Now on the same weekend, and this is very, very interesting. The same weekend of the assassination, it's believed that Roscoe might have had a hand in the assassination of J.D. Tippit, Okay, now the Tippets and the Whites lived across each other on the same street. Okay, and although Tippett and Roscoe had been neighbors and friends, and their families had been close, Roscoe did not attend Tippett's funeral. Just to give you an idea of how, And on the weekend of the assassination, November the 24th, was Ricky's third birthday. And instead of, having the party and everything, what Roscoe did, he gathered his family and took them out of the city. And they stayed there for a while, did not return, for a while. They stayed, they think, it's believed that he might have spent some days in a safe house somewhere in Central Texas. So, a lot of information now that we know about Roscoe places him right in the center of this whole thing. And when we look at the situation with the backyard photos, and now the evidence that comes out of the overlays, it's rather chilling, to think about, his role in the assassination. And I believe also that he did other hits, for probably the company or whatever they call that, and that they had him in a situation where they had weight on him. They were able to manipulate him, and so that's quite a story. That's quite a story that Roscoe White, ST.
Yes, and I think that Gary Shaw has the papers for the White family now at this point, so we're still waiting for that book to be written or to come out or wherever that project is along the process. Mm-hmm. But over 180 pages of your book, The JFK Horseman, focuses on the man in the doorway, which is a figure seen in a photo by Ike Alton. Now, that's called Alton 6 for anyone who wants to go on Google or something and look that up. Mm-hmm. I want to really go into this with you, though, in part because it was the topic of a speech that I saw you give in Dallas in 2016. You opened that conference, and for anyone who's ever spoken at a conference, the opening slot is really tough. Everyone's in the room. Everyone's anticipated this conference for a year. No one knows exactly what it's going to be, but they're sure waiting for the first speaker to get up there and do his or her thing. It is tough to open, but you did a very admirable job, so thank you for that. But before we get into the sort of the details of the Doorway Man and who that may be and why, if you wouldn't mind, could you please take us through the story of Ike Alton and the photographs that he took?
Well, Ike Alton was an AP photographer who worked out of the Dallas Morning News building over there on Houston, about 5 blocks from Dealey Plaza, 5 or 6 blocks. I'd say maybe about a quarter of a mile, maybe a little more, okay? And he was sent down to Dealey Plaza. And it's very interesting because if you look at the sequence of his photos, the ones that survive, they're Alton's 1 through 8. And, he takes the first couple of pictures at the intersection of Houston and Maine, okay? And the famous Alton 6 photograph, he snaps 4 and he snaps 5 from that position. And then the next photo is the famous Alton 6 photo, which in reality was Alton's number 5, but later on it took on a different naming, number 6. But in the roll of film that survives, which is also highly suspect, it's actually number 5. But in the position that he finds himself to take this photograph, he's right in the middle of the lane, left lane of Elm Street. And he's had enough time, ST, to walk or jog from the intersection of Houston and Maine, okay, down to practically in front of where Zapruder was, his pedestal right there in front of Zapruder. And you've been to Dealey Plaza many times, the same as I have and a lot of other researchers. And that's quite a trek, for you to move from there, from that position A, let's name it Houston and Maine, down to the south curb of Elm Street, okay, position B, and be there in time to take that iconic photograph. So this indicates the speed, which many people have postulated, how slow that motorcade was actually traveling, which is well below the regulations, of the Secret Service, and also the hairpin curve that the motorcade took. But he's able to do that and snap those first two photographs, and then move down to position to take Alton 6. And it's sort of like gives you some type of indication that there might be some photographs missing. And we do that's been suspected for a long time, especially a really good friend of mine, Roy Schaefer, who is a photographic expert. He was in a newspaper business. I also talk about him a little bit in the book. And he, in fact, I cite him in some of our emails back and forth on the authenticity of the Alton 6 photograph. But, the timing of the Alton 6 and how Ike Alton's got to that position, and then he gets back to the Dallas Morning News in order for that photograph to officially be on the wire at 1:03, which is the timestamp of the wire photo. But then, interestingly enough, the FBI, when the FBI interviews him, finally, they say that the photograph moved at 12:57. So you have a conundrum here. How is it possible, for that photograph to be on the wire in half an hour, say, the assassination's at 12:30, 12:31 or whatever, and then for him to move back, and get back to the Dallas Morning News building, but if you read the documents and you trace his movements via the photographs, from other photographers that were there in the Elite Plaza, and I go into this in a lot of detail in the book, and I publish the photographs, and I establish how fast the AP could have gotten a photograph on the wire, and I use as a means of calibrating this, the time that this could have been done, from a photograph that comes out that was snapped by the AP at Love Field, which shows JFK, Jackie, and John Connolly outside, right after they deplaned, they're on the tarmac. And if you look at John Connolly's face, and Douglas Horn actually wrote about this, and I cite him also in the book because Douglas had a wonderful comment regarding that photograph, where he says, if a picture speaks 1,000 words, then this is it, and this is what he writes. Connolly, captured between them, looks quite tense, is frowning, and appears to be staring off into the distance as if deep in thought. Sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words, okay? And I published that also in the book. So I use that as a benchmark to calibrate how fast that picture would have been able to arrive at all the news media establishments, and how fast it could have been presented to the American public on that day. Well, lo and behold, if you follow there are actual videos on YouTube which give you a blow-by-blow of the assassination as it was being reported that day by the different stations, ABC, CBS, and NBC. And so if we estimate that this photograph of Connolly, Jack, and Jackie at Love Field is taken around 11 a.m., all right, 11:07, 11:15 at the latest, okay, because they haven't even started to organize to get into the limos. Don't forget that after that, Jack went over to the fence and started to shake hands with people, so I'm estimating at maybe 11:15 at the most, okay? But then the earliest that this photograph is presented on TV is 2:07, all right? 2:07 Eastern. So we're talking about at least a couple of hours maybe more, for AP to get a photograph from the camera, off the film, off the negative, process it, and prepare it, for sending out on the wire, at least a couple of hours, ST. So when we are, and then we also know that the Alton Six Photographs did not make it onto newspapers until late that afternoon, in the very late editions, and Cronkite shows it at 6:34, 6:35. He shows the Alton Six Photograph, and in a very cropped. I mean, all the version that Cronkite shows is only shows the limo and a little bit of the and the doorway. That's it. It doesn't show the entire photograph. So what I did, in order to arrive at a more probable and plausible timeline of the Alton Six photograph, is I used the other photographs that were available. And when I went and looked at the photographs, there are a ton of photographs showing Ike Alton's still in Dealey Plaza for at least 10 minutes, And I'm talking about Rickerby, Cancellaire, and he's just calmly standing there. He's not in any hurry, to go, running over back to the Dallas Morning News building, and get his photos, on, processed. And then a very interesting detail that comes out is that in the FBI report, where Alton says that he couldn't find a phone. He was trying to get a phone in Dealey Plaza to call his office to tell them that he had pictures, that he thought he might have important pictures in his camera. So when you take all this into consideration, all right, and that all these newsmen spilling out into Dealey Plaza from the cars were also competing for telephones, to get back to their bases of operation. And then we get this information that he went looking for a phone, and in the same, and then I go furthermore into his Warren Commission testimony, and he says that. So I took another look around. I'm just hanging around there. So it's physically impossible for that photograph, to have been on the wire at 1:03. Okay. And when you analyze all this information and all the photographs of Alton's, and the FBI interview, and his own testimony, I have to conclude that the Alton Six photograph did not go out at 1:03 p.m. that afternoon, 33 minutes after the assassination. It's impossible. All right. So when you come to that conclusion, you have to start to look for alternatives. And the alternatives, are clearly that the film was intercepted at the Dallas Morning News. If you read Pictures of the Pain, okay, which it's a compendium of all of the photographic evidence and the stories of all the photographers, Richard Trask, and in the book, Alton says he gave his camera to somebody. He didn't know who he gave his camera to. Wait a minute, Alton had been working at the AP for I think 20-something years, and he's not going to know who he gave his camera to on such important film in his camera, and he's not going to be aware. That just doesn't that doesn't make any sense to me. Okay, and that being such a tight knit, in newsrooms, in newspapers, newsrooms, and everybody that's involved in this industry, they know each other. So for Alton to say that he didn't know who he gave his camera to, that's highly suspect in my mind. So it's pretty obvious to me that the film was intercepted. The closest place and the most logical place, when you analyze the capabilities, Jaggers Child Stovall, it appears that that's where it ended up. and with the information from the Reverend Shaw, saying that was the base of operations. And so we start to get a much clearer picture of what happened with Ike Alton's photographs and how they edited out what needed to be edited out, and why did they leave the figure of Doorman? A lot of people have said, hey, why didn't they just destroy the photograph? Well, the reason they didn't is because all the secret, half of the Secret Service agents are looking back towards the building where they have the patsies lined up. And I say patsies, okay, because Lee wasn't just the only patsy who was in line to take the fall. All right. My research has indicated that the very first patsy that was in line to be framed was actually Wesley Frazier. Okay, and people might say, hey, why do you say that? Well, the very first rifle that was reported was an Enfield 303. And that's exactly what they find at Wesley Frazier's house later on when they went in and did the search over in his house. Okay, a lot of the first impressions that we got, and these are, and you can see all these in those videos that I just talked about, the ABC, CBS, NBC. A lot of the information coming out at first in the first hour was probably spot on. Was probably exactly what was going on. For example, Walter Cronkite, he says Secret Service agents got out of their cars and fanned out into through the crowd looking for the assassin. You don't see that in the Zapruder film. You don't see that in the Knicks. You don't see that in the Much More. All right? You don't see Secret Service agents fanning out into the crowd. Then you have that the limo stopped. And then all of a sudden, then all that is erased. From history. And one of those comments was when they talked about the Enfield rifle. And then when I further analyzed the Alton Six photograph, I came to the conclusion when you compare it vis-a-vis the Wigman, the Dave Wigman film, where you can see all those same figures that are visoring their eyes there in the Alton Six photograph. There's 1, 2, 3. There's 3 people visoring their eyes from the lower step up to the top step, and you look at and you compare those with the people that are in the Wigman. All those 3 people are there, but there's a figure right there in the middle who is tall, lanky, same hairstyle, everything. When you compare it to the clothing that Wesley Frazier was wearing that night, because I also found some of his some photographs that showed what he was wearing that day, and it's the same guy. It's Wesley Frazier, but he's not in the Alton Six photograph. He should be in the Alton Six photograph based on those 3 figures that we see. Okay, so when you look at this, in this manner, then you say, wait a minute, why would they erase Wesley Frazier from the Alton Six photograph? And then he was, in my mind, I'm pretty sure, at least that's the evidence that I've uncovered, that he was the first patsy in line. And then that same night they went and visited Joe Molina 1:30 in the morning. Then they got Billy Lovelady. Billy Lovelady, who had been court-martialed out of the Air Force for running guns at Andrews Air Force Base. He was on the lam. He skipped bail in Maryland after they kicked him out of the Air Force, and because the fines he had this $200 fine that he was paying, in increments of $25, and then he skipped town. He's on the lam for about a year, and then they catch up with him finally at the Texas School Book, not the depository, but the company before they moved, and so you've got, all these guys there, and so what's so interesting about this is that they're all 3 are in the doorway, all 3 of them were in the doorway. I mean, all 4 of them, Lee, Molina, Wesley, and Lovelady. So, I have a chapter in the book also called The Patsies, and I go into this. because in an operation of this type of operation, they had to have backup plans. And on the evening of November the 22nd, 1963, Joe Molina gets, rousted at 1:30 in the morning by not just a couple of cops serving a warrant. We're talking about captains and lieutenants and assistant DA. Now what are they looking for, at Joe's house, at 1:30 in the morning? And clearly they say, we're looking for guns, ammunition, bombs, anything that can tie you to Lee Oswald.
Right, yeah.
So the first night, this is a very fluid situation. They didn't know who they were going to pin this on, until the next day when they finally start to, add all their P's and Q's together. So it's very, very interesting, how this whole situation with the patsies in plural. And that's why the Alton Six was so important to be published, because that's where all the Secret Service agents are looking at the time that JFK is getting shot through the throat.
So let's go to the identity of the man in the doorway, or doorway man, as he's also called. Now, in doing a bit of an informal poll of just observation, I really think this is one of those issues that almost runs down the middle 50-50 in terms of his identity, especially in the research community. I think people are very sort of evenly split on this. Mm-hmm. But your research has led you to be sure that you know the answer to this question. So who is Doorway Man, and what was the research that really brought you to that conclusion?
Well, this goes way back. Actually, this isn't something that started overnight, okay? Actually, one of the original, probably the very first man who got into this man in the doorway thing, who really did something about it, Jones Harris, whom I'm sure you've heard about. And I've spoken to Jones, many times, and he still thinks it's Lovelady, okay, but he's the one that first commissioned a guy, Bernard Hoffman, to go and look at and study the photo, and he did these enlargements, in like a mosaic, using a high-powered scope, and he put together like a mosaic, and he said, "Wait a minute, this this looks like Lee Oswald, and so Don Bonifay wrote an article, and another woman by the name of Maggie Daly in the Chicago American. Bonifay was in the New York Herald Tribune in May of 24th, 1964. So this is when the Man in the Doorway issue just begins to come about, even though other people had already been talking about it. And so they start to talk about and write about this, the situation here that Ike Alton, who was so close to the assassination, still hasn't been called before the Warren Commission. So Alton finally gets to the Warren Commission, I believe in July of that year. At the time, he says, "You guys, you're late. You're a day late and $1 short, because I wish you would have, caught up with me earlier. A lot of things, are not fresh in my mind anymore." But anyway, after the original controversy kind of subsided, and then Harold Weisberg, in his book, wonderful book, Whitewash 2, started, he wrote a couple of really important chapters on Lovelady. And in the book, he did the first 9-point study of the shirt. Forget about the face. He was focusing on the shirt. And he was going, wait a minute. That's not the shirt that Lovelady had shown up at the FBI. Let me backtrack a little bit. On February the 29th, they call in Lovelady. The FBI calls in Lovelady and tells him to bring the shirt that he had worn that day, and they wanted him to they wanted to photograph him in the shirt. And it's so comical, because if you look at these photographs, the FBI is trying to make that shirt look like it's splayed open. Like if you look at the Man in the Doorway, his shirt is splayed open almost down to his navel, and you look at the photo shoot of February the 29th, 1964, It was a sports shirt, short sleeve, vertically striped, red and white sports shirt, which button up close to the neck. Okay, and that's the way it was supposed to be worn. But this shirt in particular, they have it, open, trying to mimic, what's shown in The Man in the Doorway in the Alton Six photograph. So this is where it starts. Like I said, it starts to get a little comical, and then in the later on, that shirt all of a sudden, turns into a checkered colored shirt. They said, wait a minute, people, they're not that dumb, so let's call this a checkered colored shirt. All right. But that also has its problems, but besides all this, Weisberg is the one who really started to question, the procedures, why didn't the Warren Commission go and bring Lovelady out with his shirt and to actually put him there and taking photographs of him, which they never did, okay? I have to say that the very first man who ever did that and did studies was Ralph Sinkay in November of 2012. For as much maligned as Ralph has been over the years, I have to commend him 100% on being the very first person who actually went and did that. And he went and he contracted a photographer, professional photographer with the same equipment, and to show people, the effect of the telephoto lens, the granularity of the photograph, where exactly a doorman was positioned, because another of the misconceptions has to do with the position of doorman. Everybody thinks that he is leaning against the west wall there in the doorway, and he's not. He was standing right there in the middle of the stairway. Okay, and that's another situation that I don't know if we have time. That stairway, the top landing was only 3 feet. Now it's been taken in. It measures 9 feet and 2 inches. We went up there and measured it. But at the beginning, when the assassination took place, that was a very, very small, very narrow landing up there. It wasn't even 3 feet at the most, and that's sort of like, it raises suspicions as to why that might have happened. I have my ideas, but yeah, the history of the Man in the Doorway continued to come about every so-and-so years. Then in the 70s, they went Bob Jackson, the same guy that did the photograph of Lee's assassination in the basement of City Hall there. He went and he put Lovelady up there, and it's even more comical because he places Lovelady right down on the third step. With a checkered colored shirt. The lady's he's got sideburns by that time, this is 1971. And that's not the position of doorman. And he's not taking the picture at the correct angle. So, that's another point, that's important, because then, we're starting to get a lot of, indications here that some kind of cover-up is going on. And then we have the issue of the brass pocket, okay? Robert Groden and Kenneth Bruton visit Lovelady for the HSCA November 13, 1976, okay? Groden had just begun to work for the HSCA, and he was sent by Richard Sprague, the first director of the House Select Committee on Assassinations. After that came Bob Tannenbaum, and then Robert Blakey finished the deed in 1979. But at this time, they sent him out to Denver, to Aurora, Colorado, to take pictures of Lovelady, and see if take pictures of him in his checkered shirt. But it just so happens that the checkered shirt that he's wearing doesn't have a flap, a pocket. Okay, now there is another film, because I'm going to explain to you the relevancy of this. There's another film called the John Martin film, and that film shows a fella who Grodin and Bruton identified as Billy Lovelady hanging around outside of the Texas School Book Depository, smoking a cigarette, calmly waiting there, and he's wearing a checkered colored shirt. But when you do enhancements, and by the way, the first version of this film, the John Martin film, was terribly underexposed, which means that it was dark. And in being underexposed, the face of the man looks like he's wearing a beard. And the pocket is not visible either because of the darkness of the photograph. But this is a photograph that Bruton, one of the two photographs that Bruton and Grodin took to Colorado to show Lovelady. And it just so happens that Carl Golovin unearthed the tapes of this mission by Bruton and Grodin. And they went there, and they're trying to establish the fact that Lovelady was wearing a beard that day, okay, and that and they're talking about his shaving habits and this and that, because the version of that photo that they showed him was underexposed, showing darker tones, and Lovelady never was wore that type of facial beard or whatever. So anyway, then later on this photo comes out, and it's published by Grodin in his book, 1993 book, Killing of a President, page 187, 186, 187. And the image that's published there is clear as a bell. The photograph in black and white, this time in black and white, and the shirt is a checkered colored shirt, yes, but it's got a very clearly identifiable breast pocket, with a flap, and a pack of cigarettes in there also, to boot. So, but then Bruton and Grodin go to Denver, to Colorado, and Lovelady, whips out a shirt that doesn't have a pocket at all. So we have a problem there, and that happens in 1976. Now, this whole thing comes full circle now in the modern digital age, when we start to narrow this down and start studying the man in the doorway, and we're able to get much better enhancements. And actually, Robert Grodin was the one who did the very best enhancements of the doorway in his book, Absolute Proof, about Lee Oswald and the people that were there in the doorway, and now we have much better images to work with, in using computers and digital overlays. And that's when, like I said, now we're able to do much better and much more effective comparisons as to the man in the doorway. Not only the man in the doorway, because as you recall, I also extended this over to the man visoring his eyes, protecting his eyes from the sun. And even though you cannot see his eyes, you can see the bottom of his face, his chin, his lips, what we call the laugh lines, perioral creases, part of his nose, and one of the eyes. And we're able to actually do comparisons, forensic overlays for that individual as well. Okay? So, and in every scientific investigation, scientific protocol, you have to establish your abstract, your investigation, what you're going to investigate, your materials and methods, and then I go into the previous work that had been done, and it just so happens that Ray Marcus, the great Ray Marcus, who was one of the first generation researchers, if you read the book Praise for a Future Generation by John Kalin, he dedicates an entire chapter to Ray, and Ray did overlays of the man in the doorway, but he used frontal images of Lee and Lovelady, whereas the man in the doorway is looking at, you can see about 3/4 of his face. He's at a slight angle facing the camera. And and Ray, what he did, he took the pictures of the doorman and he laid them onto transparencies of Lovelady and Oswald. So he was on the right track. Okay, so and I mentioned it in that chapter of the book because you want to establish previous work in that area, and you want to establish that this is like you said 50-50. I think now it's got to be 90-10, but that's my opinion. And so that's how, with establishing, the background and everything, and also, how the science of facial recognition and biometrics and photogrammetry has come along and allows us to, by using computers, to give very, very accurate analysis of photographs, images, and nowadays you have even phones that can, do your facial recognition, so nobody else can use your phone. The applications, through airports, trying to find terrorists and crooks and stuff like that, and so it's a very exact science. And once you start to break it down the way I have in the book, where I established the symmetrical properties of both of the individuals' faces. When I first presented this, a researcher said, "Hey, wait a minute, not all faces are symmetrical." I said, "Yeah, you're right. Well, let me do a study on this," and I did, and I created a collage where I inverted the two faces and then overlaid them to see how symmetrical they were, and they were highly symmetrical, both of them. So, in that sense, in that regard, it was a valid method, because in the overlay I'm using for the Lee Oswald, one of the Lee Oswald image, an inverted image of him taken at City Hall that night of the assassination, when he still had his shirt, the richly textured shirt that he was wearing, sort of brownish gold, bronze color. And that's the picture that I used, and people started to say, "Wait a minute, you're using an inverted picture, how can you validate that?" And I said, "Okay, this is how I'm going to validate it." And I went in, I did the study on the symmetrical properties, okay? And by the way, I remember last summer when the Fred Noonan and Amelia Earhart picture that came out, and they did the same, they did the study. They used exactly the same technique. The man who identified Fred Noonan in that photograph, he said, "Hey, I can't find the exact angle, so I'm going to use." He found the same perspective, is what we call, and he inverted it, and he did a study. Okay, he took a frontal shot of Fred Noonan, and he put a line right down the middle, and he said, "Look how symmetrical the faces are, his faces." So he was able to validate his study, and that's exactly the way I did it. Only I did it differently. I flipped it over, and then I overlaid them. Okay, and they came out perfect, So anyway, once we got that going, I explained in detail, in very methodical detail, how the methodology, how you go about doing this with Photoshop, and how important it is to scale. Once you get the overlay onto the probe, the control photograph, which is the one that we're going to test, which is the man in the doorway, and you've got what we call a gallery image, which is the subjects that who they are, the identified subjects, and then you start to scale, and you start to arrange, and you start to look for the interpupillary distance, which is how it works. And I followed the protocol explained in facial recognition by, going with the interpupillary distance, and I established what you call the calibration of the system by using other examples. And I'm sure you remember when I did the Marilyn Monroe and the Jennifer Lopez, and I did another test of a man with 40 years difference in pictures from one and the other, because one of the images that I used was Billy Lovelady at a later age, And to show that it doesn't matter how old the individual is, the bone structure is the same. And you're able to align those by using the technique, of the overlay. And one of the most important concepts here is the opacity. The opacity where you go from 0 to 50, and then you gradually go from least opaque to more opaque. So, you keep working with it until your features line up. And if it's the same person, they're going to line up. If it's not the same person, they're not going to line up. And one of the most interesting things that I did with this was doing the animated GIFs, okay, where you were able to see the progression from the lower opacity to the higher opacity. And you could right there and then, tell if it was the same person, because as the opacity increases, if you do not see movement, then that means that the features are perfectly aligned. But when you start to see movement, okay, for example, focus on the nose, focus on the eyes. When you start to see, or on the eyebrows, when you see movement, that means that it's not lining up, okay? And that's how it's done, And I did it for what we call black hole man, the man visoring his eyes with images of Billy Lovelady, in this case, frontal images. Okay, and those were even more astounding because there was a picture done of Billy Lovelady for CBS in 1967 that showed him frontal-wise wearing a checkered colored shirt. Okay, and it showed the laugh lines. And when I started to work with it and line up, the mouth, and the nose and everything, the distance between the lips and the nose, and the chin and everything. It was a perfect fit, okay? So it's pretty obvious to me, and I'm talking about 99% sure, that Billy Lovelady, yes, he was in the doorway, but he was the man on the right, visoring his eyes, some people call him Black Hole Man. And the man on the left is Lee Oswald, okay? And the experiment, I have had it published, the methodology, that made available the images and everything. In fact, we've had the high school kids that we have worked with. Mike Cunningham has done marvelous work with, from Canada, has done marvelous work with high school kids, and we've done several presentations for them. And we have provided them with the images and everything and the methodology, and they've come up with the same results, And, what's crazy is, a lot of the people, the professionals don't want to touch this, obviously, because for, one reason or another, they do work for maybe some of the agencies, some of the, whatever, and they don't want to upset those people. But I've had people come up to me, and recently a professional who's been in Hollywood for 20 years, who's now in New York, and he said, look, what you did with the man in the doorway is case closed, as far as I'm concerned, because you nailed it. There's nothing more to discuss. What else can be done? I mean, if you go in and you try to use Lovelady onto the man in the doorway, and I used two images. One of them, he comes out so comical. I mean, because in this case, this Jackson guy, he went and he put him up there, and he put him like he was squinting, and his face is all contorted, trying to make him look like the man in the doorway. It's not natural at all. But anyway, and I had people at this last conference come up to me from the UK, and they said, look, in the UK, we've already accepted, your work is 100% valid, and the prayer man people, it's kind of over for them, even though they gave it a good run, as far as I'm concerned. They did identify one key person there that I agree with them 100%, which was Otis Williams, okay, who was Joe Molina's boss, and he was there, and his physical, characteristics are exactly the same as what they call obfuscated man, the man who's also visoring his eyes, but you can see he's short, portly, and with a big, gut, and and they identified him, and I agreed with them 100% on that. So
one more time. I was going to ask you about that photograph, actually. Now, I have the photograph up on the monitor right now. I have a pretty good size screen here, and I can see Black Hole Man clearly. I can see Doorway Man clearly. One more time, who is that man wearing the tie between the two?
Right, that's Otis. That's Joe Molina's boss. He was head of the accounting department there at the Texas School Book Depository, and yeah, that's him. And if later on, I'm sure you have the book. I published in chapter. You can go over to it. Who was in the TSBD doorway? I think that's chapter 12, and I show a picture of him. And when you compare it, it's the same guy, 100%.
Larry, I've always had one specific issue with the Oswald is Doorway Man conclusion, and I've always had one issue with Oswald being on the front steps at all, to be honest with you. And the first thing that I noticed when viewing Doorway Man next to pictures of both Oswald and Lovelady was the hairline. That's Lovelady's front hairline and not Oswald's. Now, you've explained tonight that you believe that there was alteration done to the photograph, which absolutely makes it look like it's Lovelady's hairline. So I understand your argument there. Okay. But it's the second question that I'd like to ask you about now. The idea that Oswald being on the front steps of the Texas School Book Depository at all, what I'd like to know is this. Now, there are obviously multiple people there on the steps, mainly his co-workers. And as soon as it came out that the government was claiming that it was Oswald with the rifle on the 6th floor, didn't anyone ever speak up and say, wait, no, he was standing beside or behind me on the steps? Even if they didn't say that to Warren because they were scared, or even if they didn't say that to the Dallas PD for some reason, I've never even heard a secondhand story where someone told someone else, or someone went to work the next day and told someone else at work informally that Oswald was standing near them. I've never even heard it third hand that I was sort of at the water cooler at the School Book Depository the next day, and I heard someone saying that Oswald was actually out on the steps right beside them. So I've never even heard that testimony in casual conversation. Now, this is the issue that I have with both Doorway and Prayer Man. I see what you're seeing. I absolutely do. And I see what Bart Camp is seeing with Prayer Man. I do. But I struggle with not having any first, second, or even third-hand testimony that he was on the steps at all.
No, of course not. And that's also covered in the book because that had to do with one Joseph Ball. Joseph Ball was the author, he's the one who created, this whole scenario of the doorway, and he's the one who manipulated testimony to exclude Lee and the doorway. And it's very interesting that you mentioned that because it doesn't go any further than Joseph Ball. And in fact, one of the chapters in my book is called "The Chicanery of Joseph Ball," and it covers all the testimony, all the falsehoods, the suborn, falsehoods and lies and everything that he coaxed, how he invented testimony, got supposed testimony out of witnesses, how he made the paper bag, okay. He tried to, when Lenny Mae Randall, Fraser's sister, when he was getting her testimony, she started to talk about that paper bag that wasn't more than 25 inches long, and he goes, well, could have been 27 and a half, and obviously, everybody knows that it's much, much longer than that, and then he shows Wesley Fraser a fabricated photograph of of Houston Street. Supposedly it goes beyond the Texas School Book Depository, when in reality it goes into the railroad yards, trying to establish that him and Lee, walked, that he parked all the way back there, and they both walked, and Lee, he stayed behind supposedly to rev his engine because his battery, and Lee walked in front, with something cupped under his arm, and so many studies have already been made, where they have taken actual carcanos and broken them down to see if, they could fit under your armpit, the way that supposedly Lee carried that weapon into the Texas School Book Depository. Just ridiculous, the size, and the bulk and everything. I don't know how people could, go for that,
Well,
and,
I'm always surprised that some people believe
yeah,
what they do in regard to this case. And I guess I'm still more shocked than anything that they believe the official narrative at all. But let's move to the Vice President, Lyndon Johnson. Now, there's been much talk, much debate about LBJ's actions when the shots were fired. But from what you've seen in the photographic evidence, is he aware? Is he leaning over? Is he sitting up? What exactly is he doing, and where exactly is he?
Yeah, well, that's where Blender was so useful in determining this. We in Blender we did the actual car, and we did models and of the same height, okay, and how they fit into the vehicle. And supposedly Rufus Youngblood jumped over, and protected LBJ. You've got Senator Yarborough saying that LBJ's knees were almost to his chin, because he was a tall man, and sitting back there in that seat, you've got three people sitting there, including Lady Bird in the middle. So where was there space for Youngblood to jump over, and protect LBJ? So we did a model. And it confirmed that there's just no way. And in the Alton Six photograph, in that area of the photograph, you can see that there has been airbrushing done to that area to block out Youngblood. The picture actually shows Youngblood, and then there's a void there that where you can't see LBJ. Okay, so the concept of Youngblood jumping on top of LBJ is just non-existent. And what happens is LBJ is leaning forward. He had a walkie-talkie in his hand. He was listening to some to one of the channels there, secret channels of what was going on. And even some of the motorcycle cops testified. They said, and they didn't testify. They said that he was listening to a walkie-talkie. He had it over in his ear, and so. But when we did the Blender thing, and I did a model there, and I have it up on my blog also, and also if you isolate some Zapruder frames, you can see that there's a void there next to Lady Bird, and he's not visible. You can't see him, which means that he's leaning forward. Okay, so and in the Blender model, it's in my blog later on. We can. Give your listeners the address so they can check it out. There's a lot of stuff there, and so and then we wondered why was this happening? Why would he do that? Well, in the Alton Six photograph, one of the other areas that has been blacked out are women that are filming the motorcade, and when you do a 3D reenactment of that, it just so happens that they've got their cameras trained right on LBJ's car. And we've never seen that film. We've never seen those photographs. And it's also part of, the Saturday Evening Post, December the 14th, 1963, published a wider angle of the Alton Six photograph. And in that, towards the left, you can see that these women obviously have cameras, and these cameras have been airbrushed out. And you can see one of them actually, the hand strap. She's got the hand strap over her fingers there, but you can't see the camera and you see a big ink blot there. And obviously, from determining the angles and everything, she was filming LBJ's car, and like I said, we've never seen that. So yeah, he was ducking.
Larry, you've also alluded this evening to the character commonly known as Prayer Man. Now, we did an episode with Bart Camp about Prayer Man, and I know that Brian Doyle also has his own ideas that conflict with Camp's. But then there's also another character called Badge Man, who many have claimed was Roscoe White. And I know that you've written and spoken about both. So what have you concluded regarding both Prayer Man and Badge Man?
I don't know. The Prayer Man thing came out much later. It's you can see him in the Wigman, and I believe in the Hughes or something. Well, one of the other pictures, I'm not I'm not too familiar with that. But it's what can I say? When you start from the premise that the scientific analysis that has been done on the overlays, I don't think it leaves any space for Prayer Man at all. Who knows? It could have been Shelley. Somebody moved up there. Because by the time that you can't see a Prayer Man in the Alton Six photograph, obviously. But who was that person? I have no idea. I would just be speculating. But I really can't really comment on that much. Except for the work that they did on the obfuscated man, which I accepted 100% as valid.
Well, how much time had elapsed between the taking of Alton 6, the Doorway Man photograph, and the Prayer Man photograph?
I would have to say about 30 seconds to 45 seconds.
So it would be possible then that everyone sort of scooted around on the steps outside in between the two photographs, or at least one or two people may have moved.
Yeah, sure. Now,
okay. Now, how about Badge Man?
Yeah, Badge Man. We all know that first came out in The Men Who Killed Kennedy, Part 2, when Gary Mack and Jack White did that part of the second show, and was at first glance, it looks great, the way they colorized, the image and everything, and by the way, I believe the first person who ever noticed that was Jimmy Carter's sister back in the 70s, and David Lifton also mentioned it in his book. But anyway, when there was a study done a couple of years ago, okay, by Dale Myers and what's his name? Yeah, Todd Vaughn, okay, and they went over there and they photographed. They put photographic equipment, the same type of photographic equipment, and they tried to get the angle, and they came to the conclusion that for Prayer Man to have been in the picture, he had to have been standing behind the fence and at a higher angle, probably on the roof, on the hood of a car or something like that. Okay, and I went and I did, I tried to place Badge Man where he's seen above the fence line there in the Blender model, in the 3D model, and it didn't work out. When you put him there, he is raised from the actual ground level, and if you put him at ground level, he falls below the line of visibility of the line of sight of the Mormon. Okay, so that's why Blender is so important, because you can go and we use reference images. For example, the original map that Robert Cutler had, and we use reference images like the Altons, and we use some of the Zapruder film images, so we can line up the structures and everything. And then we go and we place cameras, in the different positions, and we can replicate those positions. And that's why the new technology is so important. And when we make when we do the model for Badge Man, and we study where Badge Man is, he's, like I said, he's got to be at a higher level, and I believe it confirms Dale and Todd's work. So even though those two guys believe that, that maybe Lee Oswald did it, or they believe it. For example, Dale Myers did a computer study on the single bullet theory. Well, so what? He also did this, and I happen to agree. With that work is correct according to the 3D positioning. Of the models in Blender.
Well, Okay, I also have some issues with Dale Meyer's computer models, as they say garbage in, garbage out. But with adding lines around it, Batchman has always been very difficult for me to see. I just see a big white splotch in front of another kind of blurry item. And of course, when they draw the lines around it and tell me what I'm supposed to see, I can see it. But I'm not so sure at just viewing the picture that I can see what is even a man there. But now let's move on to the three tramps, or tramps and hobos, as they like to say in JFK. Larry, these pictures of the so-called three tramps, they are remarkably clear compared to the others that we've spoken about tonight. Yet we're still debating over 10 to 15 names of who these people might be, these three tramps or three hobos. So how can a few of the clearest photographs we have cause the most confusion and actually some of the wildest speculation?
Well, I have to agree with Gary Shaw's work on Harrelson, 100%. Charles Harrelson, Woody's father. Okay, the man behind, I don't think it was Hunt. I think it was Chauncey Holt. Okay, as he has identified himself in there and having been there. And the man in the middle, I do not have an opinion. Okay, I don't know enough about that. But yes, if you also in JFK, it's described, how the shoe leather and everything, and that they didn't look like hobos, and then supposedly later on they found the arrest records of these men, after the fact, and I believe this is also covered in. This is also covered in the Oswald talked by the LaFontaines, and and Chauncey Holt, who was an operative, okay, and he also wrote a book about his endeavors, working, for the company, and I have heard or read that. The boxcar where they were hiding out was wired with explosives. Okay, now what kind of relevance that might have, in this whole saga here, I don't know. But for them to have been paraded out like that, and where the identities of the policemen have also been suspect, and there are it's still something that's being debated to this day. But I'm pretty sure about Harrelson, and I agree with Gary Shaw. As he was presented back when Nigel Turner did, that show, The Men Who Killed Kennedy, and Chauncey Holt. I wouldn't be able to say anything about the man in the middle, but obviously they did have some kind of role in what happened in Dallas that day. It's like Beverly Brunson said, there were a lot of different cast of characters, different, you had Cubans, you had Birch Society people who might have been there, you had, different operatives, you got mafia types, you got, so that anything is possible, to give all the different versions, who did what and what might have happened, and keep everybody guessing, so many years after. Okay. So, yeah.
Larry, from all the photography that we've accumulated from that day in Dealey Plaza, is there anything that we can learn about the angle or angles of the shots that were fired?
Sure. Again, this is where you have to go down there and do field work, which we have done. And I have a problem with a grassy knoll shot because of the angle, the vector. And furthermore, when you go and you look at this in Blender, you get a much better idea of these trajectories. For example, the frontal shot that hit JFK in right below the Adam's apple. Okay, if you go to Dealey Plaza and you try to trace that shot, it's just no way it came from the grassy knoll. Okay, now Roy Schaefer sent me information. He said, go look under the bridge, under the triple overpass, but on the south side of Dealey Plaza. And we went over there and we went under the bridge, and we looked at the angle, and it was perfect, right? I mean, right on the money. In fact, if you look at how the cars come at you on Elm Street, you've got that gentle S curve, you know, coming down, and the cars are practically stationary. Okay, and then another researcher pointed out the fact that it also lines up from behind with the Daltex building, with the second floor of the Daltex building. Okay, and I said, wow, you know, that's perfect crossfire right there. You know, one from behind and one from the front. You know, and so other people that had already done work on that, Doug Weldon, but from the top of the triple overpass there at the same position, what we did, we took it down to the bottom there, inside the tunnel, where you have much better cover. And it just so happens, and I sent Ray Hale over there. I talked to him about it. He went over there. He said, "Man, that's perfect." You know, and there happens to be a junction box, some kind of electrical box or toolbox there that at that time would have been perfect to stash a weapon. It's big. It's very spacey in there. You know, you can after and the position that we're proposing is where the railing, the cement railing, meets the column there, and anybody, you know, would have been able to use that position not just for cover but to steady a weapon. And after doing it, you know, just stash the weapon away and just mingle with the crowd. All you needed was a couple of cops, you know, playing cops, a couple of operatives playing you know, dressed as cops, not just for the frontal entrance there, but for the back entrance, because it's a very long corridor that goes under the triple overpass. It's a sidewalk, and it goes parallel with Commerce there, you know, and so it was a perfect position, that one. And my pet theory, and I also go into it in the book, I believe that the headshot, at least the one that did most of the damage, came from the storm drain. And my work is backed by Penn Jones Jr., by John Judge, by Jim Garrison, by Vincent Salandria, you know. And again, when we go and we do this in Blender, the angles line up perfectly. If you look at Zapruder frame 312, okay, and you look at the angle of JFK at right before, the microsecond before his head explodes, his head is leaning forward at a 60-degree angle, ST. So in order for that big blowout in the back of the head to be possible, this shot had to have come from a lower angle. Now, if you read Kellerman's testimony in the Warren Commission, he's talking about an upshot into the vehicle, a shot coming from below, okay? And Penn Jones and John Judge used to go over there, and Penn Jones Jr. would crawl into that manhole cover and go and peek out through the storm drain, and he found out that it was a perfect angle for the headshot. And at that time, and this is why this is so important, because a lot of the landmarks have been changed over the years, and this is one of the ones that have changed. That storm drain was filled in, I think, about 3 feet of cement below. Okay, so it used to go deeper, and that storm drain goes across Elm Street, and then it runs upwards right towards the what used to be there, the Dallas Police Department, the sheriff's office, and it comes down into the basement of the sheriff's office. I mean, the sheriff's building there. Of all, you know, coincidences, quote unquote coincidences. And then going the other way, it goes down the sidewalk and then connects towards the triple overpass there towards the right, and it goes up towards the area of where the picket fence joins the triple overpass there. So this whole network of pipes, you know, going under Dealey Plaza, I believe was very important in the execution, you know, of the assassination. And that angle there from the storm drain, especially when you consider that not Roy Kellerman, but Greer, William Greer, pulled the limo to a complete stop, you know, and set him up. You've seen in the Zapruder film where you have these yellow markers on the curb on the south side of of Elm Street. These yellow markers have never been seen there before until November the 22nd. And so I believe that those were markers positions that the limo had to stop, so that hitting a moving target, like that headshot is not an easy feat. Okay, so in order to get this done, I'm pretty sure that the limo, they had to bring the limo to a complete stop, and they had to have it in a position that would be perfect for that storm drain shot, which is what took his head off. And Douglas Horne has also done great work on this, and David Mantic on that. There was a hole of entry right above his right eyebrow, and when you line it up with the images that David Mantic has published in his book on the head wounds of JFK, where he has placed a Harper fragment exactly where it came from, it lines up perfectly, and if you extrapolate that line down to the storm drain, that's I believe that's where it came from, and I also dedicate an entire chapter, in the book to this shot. Now, if there were other shots, obviously, I think from the Daltex building, from the second floor, yes. In the blender model, I have established that one of the shots that could have hit him from the back, going downward, a downward trajectory, could have also come from the roof of the Daltex building. Okay. Now, everybody has always been always talked about the county records building where Weatherford was stationed. Okay, Harry Weatherford, but the blender model also points to a possibility of the roof of the Daltex building, and nobody's ever talked about that one before.
Now, I've had a couple people tell me that you've been great on the 2017-2018 document releases, and David Denton told us that recently on the show, actually. So you've gone through many of these documents, and you found some very interesting items.
Yeah. I've there's a lot of really, really good information in the documents. You just have to take the time to sit through it all. Unfortunately, from the beginning, these documents were sent out as PDFs that were not searchable. I mean, this is something that's unheard of nowadays, If you go to Mary Farrell, most of them have been already converted to searchable documents. But where do you start? Where do you begin? Because it's just a hodgepodge, of documents thrown out there in random fashion, okay? Some are for example, a file might have 20 pages. Some of them are in order of the scanning of those files, but the majority are not. All right, and in those files, I found, for example, Orestes Pena, who was the owner of the Havana bar down there in New Orleans, and right before the assassination, and the information that he provided in a closed HSCA testimony that was never published before. It only came out in the new documents, and Dr. David Denton, found that was one of the part of my presentation in the DC in March, and the information in there is just incredible, outstanding. He talks about Warren DeBruey's role in this whole thing, how Oswald was chummy and was part of a gang of federal employees there, hanging out with the ATF, with the FBI, this whole group of people who were obviously, agents, and how he was certain that DeBruey's went to Dallas with Oswald before the assassination. All right. Now, this DeBruey's guy, if you follow what happened to him right after the assassination, they sent him to South America, and he ended up in Puerto Rico in 1974, 1973. So it's pretty obvious that they wanted to hide the Warren DeBruey's, and he stonewalled the Garrison investigation as well. They sent him to Washington. He gave Garrison the middle finger, no way, and that's one of the documents. And in that, in Orestes Pena, in his testimony, I was just completely amazed at the amount of information that Pena provided that was actually suppressed by the HSCA. And with that, well, you obviously have to point the finger at Robert Blakey, because this is something that should have been brought out, and Pena was threatened, Du Bois said, you keep talking, we can get rid of your ass, just like that, And so Pena, he talked, but he said, I don't want, I don't want to, end up in a 55 gallon barrel or something like that. But and then also I came across a lot of documents that revealed that the next governor of Puerto Rico, who has been, a very, very important person and the family for a long, long time, was actually a CIA operative who was involved in ensconcing away Silvia Odio and dealing with Silvia Odio. He was half Cuban, and he was in a peripheral manner involved in taking in one of the most important assassination witnesses, and also other really important information. For example, on the relationship between a handler in Mexico City and an informant who worked for the CIA there, and who was responsible for one of the supposed confirmations of Sylvia Duran being involved romantically with Lee Oswald, which I think is a crock, and because there are only two people who actually confirmed this, and one of them was this guy, and it turns out that the new information, the new documents that came out about this guy, his cryptonym was Leering 3, and he was an actual operative for the CIA, an informant. He worked for the CIA, going back and forth to Cuba, going back and forth to Central America, informing on what was going on in Cuba. His wife was Cuban, so he was a very important operative. And the only confirmation that we have about Sylvia Duran and supposedly being with Lee Oswald romantically involved is his confirmation from a third person, where he told his handler, you don't get a direct confirmation and say, oh yeah, I saw them, and this and that. And Elena Guerrero de Paz, who was a poet and a writer, very famous writer in Mexico, who supposedly also confirmed that she had seen Lee Oswald at twist parties, in a twist party in Mexico City in early September 1963, hanging out with a couple of beatnik-looking guys, and that she also said that Lee and Sylvia, but she was actually Sylvia's cousin, and she and Sylvia, had issues, so that's supposedly. And then after, when the HSCA tried to get a hold of her, she split. She went to Spain. They couldn't get a hold of her, and then when they did interviews with some of the other agents there at Mexico City, they said that she had no credibility whatsoever. So this is just a couple of the from the new documents. The latest one that I found yesterday, just a couple of days ago, and just to whet your appetite here, there was a doctor by the name of John Nichols, and he testified at the Clay Shaw trial for Jim Garrison during the Garrison investigation. And he was a pathologist at the University of Kansas. And in 1969, he testified. He said, look, he was shot from the front, And he's a guy, I don't know if you ever heard of the adrenal glands of JFK, that they were atrophied, and that he wouldn't have really lived, to be, that ripe age or whatever. And so Dr. Nichols, in the new documents, they talk about trying to dig up dirt on him, and they did a full investigation. And I'm talking about the CIA, and in this whole thing about the CIA, we're getting a new cryptonym that they use for the CIA, and it's called Wolfram, WOFIRM, Wolfram. And we already know about Q-Bark as being a cryptonym for the CIA, but we never knew about Wolfram. And when I went and looked at another document from Kubela, Rolando Kubela, and they also talked about him being an agent for Wolfram. And in this document that I found, they're, trying to get Dr. Nichols, dig up some dirt on him. And for example, I'll just quote you real quickly here. This is a cable that I found. But since he recently involved in Garrison prosecution of Shaw, do not believe he should be used. Reason is Garrison bringing new prosecution against Shaw, and this could implicate Cobb and give Garrison his opportunity to involve Wolfram. That's in the Nichols in the Nichols file. And then Rolando Cubelas, talking about another Wolfram agent. So basically, the new information that I'm able to glean here is that that Wolfram was another cryptonym for the CIA, and B, that they tried to get to dig up dirt on Dr. Nichols, so that he wouldn't cooperate and work with Garrison in the case. So just a couple of examples, a lot of other stuff, that's in there. You just have to know how to analyze it. Eloy Gutierrez Menoyo and Captain William Morgan, who were operatives they fought side by side with Fidel Castro. Tons of documents on those two guys. I don't even know when I'm going to be able to analyze that, but there's just so many documents. I'm in touch with Gutierrez's daughter in Puerto Rico, and she's just amazed at the stuff that's come out on her father. After so many years, he died in 2009 after going back to Cuba, and so just a lot of really good stuff. Yeah, and I'm happy to hear that that they think I'm a document wizard, but it's just there. All you have to do is get roll up your sleeves and get in there.
So tentatively, you're scheduled to speak at the conference in Olney, Illinois on Saturday, April the 6th at 10:20 a.m. Now, you'll be speaking about the document releases and some of the things that we just talked about and have talked about throughout the evening tonight. Yeah. And we're all excited about that. But if anyone right now would like more information on the JFK Horsemen or would like to follow you online, how can they do that?
Yeah, well, I have a blog. It's MERDIST/WP. That's for WordPress. I run a couple of WordPress sites. That's one of them. MERDIST.com/WP. And I've got articles going back there a couple of years now, from the beginning of 2017. And like I said, anything that you see there, I've got actually the actual gifts of Lee Oswald and Billy Lovelady, the overlays. If you want to take them down and copy them and do whatever you want to do with them, more than welcome. Anything that's up there, and it's just like I said, I put it all in the public domain. It's something for everybody to consume.
Hey, are you still doing the new JFK show?
Yeah, well, with Jim Fetcher and Gary King on Wednesdays. That's on 153news.org. And what happened is we had more than 200. 153news.net is the website, and there's a channel there, Gary King. We used to have all these shows on YouTube, but they got scrubbed, And in those shows, a couple of most of the really important shows that we did in 2014, which were the JFK Horsemen. Which had to do with the recordings, the tape recordings that Fred Newcomb did of the 5 or 6 motorcycle cops, outriders that were with JFK that day, the 4 that were in the immediate vicinity, another one, a couple of others, and their supervisor. So in total, there were about 7 tapes, and they talked about what they experienced that day. What Newcomb did, he sent them copies of the Zapruder film, bootleg copies of the Zapruder film in 1971. And then he followed up with them, and some of the revelations have changed the entire scene of what happened on Dealey Plaza. I think And we had those up there for about, oh my God, we had tens of thousands of views and likes, and they got taken down because, they weren't offending anybody, but for some reason, they were taken down in the more than 200 videos that Gary King had up there. So we're going to get them up on the other site. Looking also to get them onto my site because they're very important videos. They were the actual tapes of what these men experienced. They were never interviewed by the Warren Commission. The FBI only interviewed them like 13 years later, and they, some of the information in those interviews was fabricated. These are the actual interviews, and I cover them in my book. It's actually the last chapter in the book, and with the transcripts and everything, and Hargis talking about the limo stopping, James Chaney talking about Hargis running in between the limos, and for that to have happened, the limos had to have been stopped. About Jackson seeing all these Secret Service men surrounding the JFK limo with the guns drawn. Jackson talking about the Zapruder film. It's been edited. It's been cut up. Which is exactly what I heard Douglas Horn, because he mentioned my work in the last show that you did with Douglas, and I'm grateful for that. And Stavis Ellis talking about a chunk of JFK's skull, which landed on the south curb and landed at the feet of a kid, and one of the Secret Service men, dismounting, from the Queen Mary and taking the chunk of skull and throwing it into the limo, which I believe that was the first time that JFK's body was actually desecrated, after, being shot the way he was, and holding the windshield, so much information that's coming directly from the people that were closest to the JFK limo, B.J. Martin, and so, all this history, all this information, has been left out, of all of our textbooks, of all of our, a lot of the JFK books, and I'll tell you, it took me, I think 5 months to decipher, because some of the tapes were in poor, the condition, I had to run those through video audio enhancement software, and then transcribing, and because some of the phone calls, some were good, some were medium, some were a little, tough to hear, but, eventually I was able to clean them up, and I think that's also one of the big accomplishments, in the recent years, because I think, the JFK horsemen, and that's why I titled the book, that way. They were very, very, very important. And the reason that they're the horsemen is because they call themselves motor jockeys, amongst themselves, because they were motorcycle cops, all right? And so, hence, the JFK horsemen.
Right. I do like the title of the book, The JFK Horseman by Larry Rivera. And as I've told people before, you were the first speaker at my first JFK conference in Dallas. And I was absolutely enthralled. You were great in 2016. And I look forward to seeing you again in Albany. That'll be a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Well, this has been Larry Rivera. We'll have all the pertinent links on the post accompanying this episode. And we'll have a few examples of the overlays as well that Larry has supplied. So Larry Rivera, I want to thank you so much for being on with us tonight.
Thank you, ST. It's a pleasure. I'm very honored to be on your show and to be considered. And thank you very much, for your kind words. This is just something that, someday history is going to have to be revised. And maybe not tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, next week or next year, but sooner or later, people are going to realize, the importance of this event in U.S. history. And it will be revised, the same as the Lincoln assassination over the years had to be revised. So,
I'm St. Patrick. This is the Midnight Rider News Show, and we'll be right back.
This is Lieutenant Colonel Jim Wilbanks, author of The Tet Offensive, A Concise History. For more on the 1968 Tet Offensive attacks on South Vietnam and how they changed both the course of the war and Lyndon Johnson's presidency, join me on episode 43 on the Midnight Rider News Show.
You know, it's very hard for me to even believe that I have to do this version of the Final Thoughts tonight, but I must come on and tell you that I am not anti-Semitic, I am not racist, and I've never met Willis Carto. So, yeah, okay, here's the story. Now, we were very proud of the work that we did with Deep Truth Journal, and we still are. Everyone involved absolutely rocked this effort. And I still believe it's the best magazine that I've read in years, at least until Garrison debuts in April. But I had two guys help me with it, Chris and Paul. Now, Chris is the editor of American Free Press, and Paul is its designer. And as many of you know, I write for American Free Press. They call me a contributing editor, but that's really only a title. I really don't do any editing for AFP. So now you're asking, well, then why the title, right? Well, okay, so to be technical, here's the definition of contributing editor from Wikipedia. Quote, a contributing editor is a newspaper, magazine, or online job title that varies in its responsibilities. Often, but not always, a contributing editor is a high-end freelancer, consultant, or expert who has proven ability and has readership draw. Unquote. So, that's what it basically is. You know, it varies widely. Well, so that's what I do. I write 3 articles for them every 2 weeks. That's my sole role. I let Chris know what I'll be writing about, and then in every case, he's responded in the affirmative. Now, they have never told me what to write. They have never asked that I change my slant on an issue, and they've never asked that I take one side or the other. They truly allow me to do what I do. Now, I was asked to write for AFP because, in part, I'm a nonpartisan who can analyze and criticize both sides of the political aisle equally. I don't have a horse in that race. As you've heard me say many times on this show, I believe that the two-party monopoly is two sides of the same coin. I do not have a horse in this race. But the AFP has a subscribership that skews towards being both elderly and conservative populace. So what does conservative populace mean? Well, I use that expression to mean that the readership likes Ron Paul and Pat Buchanan, and they do not like George Bush, Dick Cheney, and Mitt Romney. Not at all. Now, I've really formed a pretty good relationship with the readers who email, and even though I probably challenge their beliefs quite often, they're all very nice. And I try to do so respectfully. I want them to think, and they know that. We should all challenge our own beliefs. I've also said that on the show multiple times. But the AFP is historically an extension of the Spotlight, which was started by Willis Carto in 1975 and ran until 2001. And while I do believe that they were ahead of the pack on some research dealing with, for example, the Bilderbergers, the Trilateral Commission, the Rockefellers, the Council on Foreign Relations, they absolutely went too far for my own tastes and beliefs on Israeli issues and racial issues. You know, they were far right and not always in a Ron Paul sort of libertarian way. They even bordered on Holocaust denial, dependent upon the writer. And I absolutely want to say that because I do not want to paint all contributors as anti-Semitic or racist at all. That's what's happening to me. But it did pander to the crowd at times, in which would have been, back then, pretty uncomfortable for me, and uncomfortable to the point which I probably would not have written for the magazine or for the newspaper. And I say probably, and here's the only reason I say probably. I've always believed that you can change things as one voice, and you won't change anything where people are just sort of patting you on the back. So to affect true change, you have to be somewhere where you're a bit of an outsider ideologically. You can't affect change from the inside, where on the inside everyone agrees with you. So to make an analogy, you can't change a racist town from the state capitol building 300 miles away. You can't legislate it out of people. You have to be in that town. You have to talk to the people in that town. And you have to present another side within that town. But most people are ideological cowards, and frankly, I accept that. I know that. They'll sit behind a keyboard and a monitor of some kind, and they'll trash other people to those who they know will like their posts. Now, they're the only ones who are truly preaching to the choir, but at that point, who are they changing? So I've written for the American Free Press since October of 2017. I write from my home. There's an office in Maryland, I believe, but there are very few people there, from what I understand. We have no powwows, and there are no meetings where we scheme to coordinate thought. Now, I've never met Chris or Paul in person. I've talked to them both over the phone. I think I've talked to Chris on the phone once in a year, and I've probably talked to Paul 4 or 5 times in the past year and a half. Now, Chris and Paul, I do know this, they are also not racist and not anti-Semitic. They have no use for that either. They are both trying to do the right thing at AFP, and they're both trying to move toward a nonpartisan paper that can look at issues and look at history in a way that you won't find in the mainstream media. That's what they want. They want to think first and foremost about working people from both sides of the aisle who are just getting the shaft in the mainstream media. So Willis Carto, let's talk about him for a second. Willis Carto is dead. Michael Collins Piper is dead. Victor Thorne is dead. And most of the Carto gang is long gone, and Chris and Paul are trying to make the paper towards the middle, trying to push it towards the middle while keeping their subscriber base. Now, because of that, Donald Jeffries and I have both been hired. Now, Donald considers himself a liberal, and he'll tell you that. He's told us that on the show multiple times. I consider myself, as I said, a nonpartisan. This is a new direction. And there are a few other writers that I've suggested to them who I think will also be joining AFP in 2019, and they're also not right-wingers. Now, there are still one or two holdovers from the past whose work is, I'll admit, sometimes embarrassing to me. And that's absolutely true. And one day, believe me when I tell you this, they'll be gone too. But when you're trying to re-educate a subscriber base, you can't just raise a new flag one day and tell them just to follow it blindly because you've raised it. They won't do that. They'll unsubscribe and you no longer have a paper. So you do what is really best. You put in the time. You put in the work. You make the effort to teach them current events and history in a new way. And then you hope they respond to it positively. Isn't that what change is? I mean, tell me this. When will the National Review or the Nation, for example, hire nonpartisans or writers who may go directly against the oldest beliefs of their subscriber bases? And when do they do that multiple times? Okay, I'm waiting for an answer. Yeah, I can't think of one either. No, I'm not a Holocaust denier. I'm not a racist. I have zero ties to Carto or the old Spotlight paper or ideology. I find many on that wing dangerous. But the AFP allows me to write the kind of things that I talk to you about on each episode, and they allow me to do it in a way that I want to do it. They allow me to write in a way that I want to write. So sometimes, though, you can't shake the past, even when you deserve the right to do so and you work hard to do so. And the Southern Poverty Law Center will always bash the AFP as anti-Semitic and racist. But I bet they haven't even read an issue in years. They also hate people, oh, by the way, who they think are conspiracy theorists. Now, who all would that include in this audience and on this show? I think at this point we should all be pointing at ourselves. Now, Chris helped us out by financing Deep Truth Journal of the first issue, and Paul helped out by designing it. And so Deep Truth Journal will stay with the AFP, and it should. They took a real risk by allowing me full editorial powers to create a magazine that honestly skews very far to the left in its hires. I don't think that we hired any right-wingers in Deep Truth Journal. And again, what does that show? So what I want to do now with Garrison is to keep the same writers and to start a new magazine that is totally independent of everyone. Sadly, I'm paying for the whole thing, which is a bit of a challenge, but I'm going to do so because I truly want this to be independent. But you won't see the National Review funding and designing a magazine aimed at Democrats. And you won't see the Nation funding and designing one aimed at Republicans. In essence, that's the risk that Chris and Paul took in working with me with Deep Truth Journal and in really asking me to do it. That was a risk for them, and I hope that you understand that. But because I write for AFP and because they help me produce Deep Truth Journal, that doesn't mean that we should get branded with the old Carto stereotypes. That is ridiculous. I dare anyone to read my work with the AFP, and you can read much of it online and on my own site, midnightwriternews.com. And so try to do that and then try to paint me as either anti-Semitic or racist. But I get it. It's an easy thing to do. But it's easy and it's lazy to just assume that you know someone because of where they work. Because the problem is that you don't. And do you really also want to be judged on the ideological problems of the founders of your own workplace? Did Time Magazine's writers in the 1980s, for example, have to denounce the Luce family to get people to buy the magazine? Do newspapers in San Francisco have to continuously denounce William Randolph Hearst? Again, I write from home, writing what I write because I'm interested in the topics, and that's all. The AFP is trying to move in a good direction, but some people just refuse to let it do so. So should we ever really stand in the way of someone's desire to change? Someone's desire to do the right thing? That's really the question, isn't it? And it's sad that we even have to ask that. So from the other side of the mountain, on the best side of midnight, I do wish you peace.